Welcome to the Revolution Church podcast.
Good morning. Good afternoon. It feels like morning. It is very, very snowy here in Washington State. I'd say we've already probably got at least 1.5 feet of snow. So they're not as good with the salt trucks here as they are in Minnesota for some reason. I hope you guys had a wonderful holiday season. And holiday season, I guess it's still holiday season, right? Until we get to New Year's. So I'm really tired. Really, really tired. I think it's just emotional tiredness, to be honest with you. But yeah, so lots think. Oh, it's 62 in Toronto, David? Really? Well, it is super snowy here. It is like a winter wonderland. My kiddos are up at their mom's parents' vacation house, which is just about 2 hours from here. And I got pictures this morning of them in the snow, and man, the kids love the snow. They're mad at me that we left Minnesota because it's of the snow. It's 55 in LA. Steve, put on your winter gear. Get your snow boots out. I remember when I lived in Orlando, Florida, and if it went below like 70, we didn't have to like go outside for gym. Oh, I loved it. That was my favorite day, is when we didn't have to dress up for gym. I actually failed my first year of gym. In case you're wondering how athletic the bakers are. So yeah, it's the holidays. This was my first Christmas on my own. It was wild because this was my Christmas with the kids, but their grandparents live in Switzerland, so they got to come in town, and I wanted them to be able to be with their family, their grandparents, on Christmas, and they were all getting together. So we went ahead and I did Christmas early with the kids, and it was really fantastic, and we had a blast. Little tree and lots of fun toys. Santa Claus shows up early for divorced parents. Very busy, Santa. Very busy, especially with divorce parents, separated parents. So they should add that in the movies, that he leaves a week early and stays a week later. So the magic continues for those with divorced parents, which is more than half of the world, I'm guessing. But yeah, so we had a great time, and so it was really nice because my ex-wife gave me a really amazing card, which was really, really nice, and she gave me a bunch of gift certificates to the movies because she knew I wanted to just go like just block everything out and go to the theater. So yesterday I went and saw 3 movies and just hung out in the theater all day, and it was really cool. So actually, the night before I went and saw another movie. So I went and saw Spider-Man, and I saw The Matrix, and the new Del Toro movie, and Ghostbusters. So yeah, that's what I did for Christmas. It was nice. Because honestly, I mean, like, we have so many expectations on Christmas, and capitalism actually adds to that. You know, like, oh, look, I love like the car commercials where they come out and like, I bought you a Mercedes. Like, you know, who doesn't talk to their significant other before they buy a car? But there's so many expectations, and so it's tough. Like holidays are tough, and you think about people you love and people you've lost, and things like that, and so I was a little bit worried about that, and honestly, the movie idea worked really well. I ate a little bit too much on the candy, probably. No, I mean, it wasn't a sad Christmas. It was good. It worked out well. So I'm not saying feel sorry for Jay. I've had sad Christmases. The first Christmas I went to visit my dad in prison was me and my sister and my dad and us, and that was a really tough one. And also the last Christmas my dad was in prison, where my parents were divorced, and he was in Jessup, Georgia, in the middle of nowhere, Georgia, and I decided to spend Christmas with him. But they only gave us, I think, like a 3-hour visit that day, which was a shorter visit, because I don't think it was a normal visiting day. And then I had to go back to the motel and eat Christmas dinner out of the vending machine, because the 3 restaurants in town were closed. So I would say that was the saddest Christmas I ever had, was the Christmas I spent with my dad in Jessup, Georgia, and I was probably around 17 or 18. That was a bit tough. But a whole day of movies was awesome. I used to do that when I lived in Arizona, when I would have a day off from Revolution in Arizona, because it was like 1,000 degrees during the summer. So often I would just and there's like, as long as you bought something from the snack machine, the snack booth, they didn't mind if you just went from movie to movie. So I would just get one ticket and just spend the day watching movies and eating soft serve ice cream in Arizona. But anyhow, there you go. That was my saddest Christmas. We're not here to talk about that. That was just my teaser. That's just my monologue. I can't believe it's snowing, though. I did wake up really shocked. I actually woke up to my ex-wife sending me a picture of my kids in the snow, and I'm like, oh my gosh, they're ecstatic. But today is going to be a little bit of a sequel to last week. And I think it came up because of a lot of different reasons. But one, Christmas. But the other one is that, through some of the current work I'm also doing with my psychoanalyst work, with my psychoanalyst, has kind of brought up this idea of the split and contradiction, and he's actually influenced by Hegel, which is really interesting, and Freud as well, and a few other great people. He's a pretty dynamite analyst. But also the idea that Christmas is the contradiction manifested. And in a way, is it because God becomes man, yet is man and is still God? Like, there's still a father-son situation, but they're one. So there's a huge contradiction there. Do you see that? The Trinity actually might help us understand sometimes how contradiction works, and how sometimes contradiction can be higher than truth, if you will. That concept of the 3 in 1. But anyway, we're going to get into that a little bit today, but we're going to kind of do a sequel, and it is out of Todd's book, but I wasn't even thinking about the second part that Todd wrote about religion last week when I was talking to you guys. I was like, oh, no, I don't need to do that one. And then, I don't know, I think it's just unconsciously I was like, something hit me, and then it became conscious, that like this is something we need to look at. So Hegel, I'm gonna once again be talking from the Emancipation After Hegel by Todd McGowan. Like I said, this is kind of the second part 2 of last week, if you will. I never do holiday-themed talks, but I do think that this is an interesting way to do it. But I have to read. But I'm not going to, honestly, I love the Bible. No book has influenced my life more. But it has led me to other things and other truth and other reality and through philosophy. But also the great thing is that the philosophy has brought me back to Christianity to make me see truths that we've never seen before. Like projection, for instance. The idea of projection. You've heard of, oh, somebody's projecting on me. Well, the ultimate idea of projection, if you think about it, is our sins being put onto Christ. And Christ saying, "Oh, take your." So we project our sins onto Christ. So these concepts are so tied in, interesting, and intertwined with Christianity that it's pretty cool. But this is like we're trying to look at a different side of Christianity, not what most of us grew up with or most of us are rebelling against, but an essence truth of Christianity, or maybe the reason why someone like Peter Rollins is a Christian. What is there? What is that truth that is there that can go beyond even those of us or those of you who say, oh, there is no God, God beyond God, and not having a God. And so even if you're an atheist, these are truths that are still truths that we can look at and take further on. So there are some truths in Christianity that could probably help. How about trying SSRIs? I've done a lot of medication. I don't know if that's what you're referring to, but I am on medication, but seeing an analyst is probably the best thing I've ever done, and I hope to get off of medication if I can, because what I've realized through seeing an analyst, I'm sidetracking here for a second, but what I've realized through seeing a psychoanalyst is the idea of is that it's almost undoing work that I've learned through therapy before, and through even seeing psychiatrists who are like kind of drug dealers now. You walk into a psychiatrist's office and they go, "What's your prescription? How are you feeling? Great. All right, here you go. Bye." So seeing an analyst, you get undone the work that you've learned to cope, because it teaches you how to cope, and you've learned positive coping mechanisms through a lot of therapy. But what the analyst is doing is stripping those free, and we're trying to get down to the very trauma that caused all this pain, that caused the need for all these coping mechanisms. So it's a stripping, and it's very tough because you're going to the heart of the trauma, and you're going to the heart of the darkness, and you're facing that, and you're realizing how much of your life and the lenses that you see your life through have been developed because of that trauma. And so in a way it is helping you set you free from all that. So so now when I have an anxiety attack, things I know is what's going on in my life. Why am I having a panic attack? What am I not dealing with? Starting to realize these things through facing that trauma. But it's not for the weak of heart. It has really undone me quite a bit. It's been really tough to show up here every week and do these talks, and to be a parent, and to do all that stuff, because I have to deal with facing those issues, But we're not going to get sidetracked today. We're going to talk about the split. We're not going to get sidetracked anymore. All right, guys. Psychoanalysis is amazing, and it is really tough. It's really helpful, and it's where all therapy comes from. So it is the base of therapy. The reason it's not more popular is because they would prefer to see you 2 to 3 times a week, and because of capitalism and because of big insurance companies, they don't support it. So big insurance doesn't want to support you actually getting fixed, and the big drug companies don't want you to get off of medication. They want you to stay there, and so that's why they pay our psychiatrists so much to continue to prescribe you medication. Capitalism is fun. All right, back on track, folks. punk rocker is going away and the pastor is going to show up. But let's take a look at this. When I'm reading from, once again, Emancipation after Hegel, McGowan. But don't worry, we're talking about Jesus for you religious folks. When we grasp Hegel's conception of freedom and its relationship to the contradiction, the explanation for the privileged role that Christianity plays in his thinking about history becomes clear. It is not that Hegel simply prefers his own religion and that that of Europe. Now, do you hear that? I want to. It's not that it's just his religion and that it's the religion of Europe that draws Hegel into Christianity. And I think that's what a lot of people would just be like, oh, well, he was a product of his time and blah blah blah, and and things like that. But also he was also maybe the greatest thinker ever, one of the greatest philosophers ever. So pay attention. It would be very easy for him to write off any religion. And for a time, that's what he did, is he just saw all religions as just, just what we needed, what our crutches. So let's pay attention to this. This is important. And the reason I say this is important is because often, we don't think of Christianity and intellectuals going hand in hand. But the fact is that a lot of intellectuals, a lot of great philosophers, do hold certain parts of Christianity very important. Even Paul is respected seen as a philosopher. So I think it's important for us to see this because, it's like, you can be an intellectual Christian, you can be an intellectual atheist, you can be an intellectual Buddhist, you can be an intellectual whatever you want. But the fact is that these are good things to look at. Not everybody's like, hey man, I just think Jesus is cool and everybody else is dumb. So here we go. It is not Hegel's simply prefers his religion or that of Europe's, which is what it seems on the surface, McGowan writes. Christianity offers a philosophical insight that no other religion does. Now, this might be controversial because it's saying that no other religion does, so hold on to your socks. The insight derives from the unprecedented act of divine humiliation that it enacts, and that is what Hegel finds so appealing about it. Did you get that? A divine humiliation. So what draws Hegel to Christianity is not just the concept of love, but divine humiliation. Are you ready for that? With the death of Christ on the cross, humanity is able to witness the contradiction at the heart of the divine. The revelation that the divine endures the travails of finitude. It is a moment in which the infinite shows itself as finite, an event that strips all authority from the divine. So all of a sudden, the divine becomes powerless. You see? And, the divine becomes powerless, which is really amazing. And it is the moment in which the infinite shows itself as finite. So there you have, all of a sudden, something that's infinite now becomes finite. And so once again, we have that word contradiction. The problem is most people think of the word contradiction as a really bad term, or that's something that's awful. I remember that Chris Christopherson wrote a song about Johnny Cash, and he goes, in the line was, he's a walking contradiction, and partly truth, partly fiction. And I remember thinking like, that's kind of a burn for your best buddy. And the idea is, though, is contradiction is not always a bad thing. Matter of fact, most of the time it's not, and it's something that we all have to deal with. We all have to believe and grasp. Some we can change and some we can't. But there's also a time where contradictions, two opposites come together and contradiction is created, and it's something above truth. It's almost in the way that Tillich talked about the God above, the God beyond God. When the God of our own understanding dies, the God that shows up, that God. And that there can be a greater, something be above truth. I don't even want to say greater truth, but that which is above truth, which is a contradiction that lies within the contradiction. And what we're going to see is that Christianity is full of contradiction, but it is a word that so many people have avoided because they don't like the negative thoughts that come along with it, the negative connotations that come along with the idea of contradiction. But the whole Father, Son, Holy Ghost thing is a total, like, 3 in 1 is a contradiction. 2 in 1 can be a contradiction. And so how do we embrace this contradiction to be a higher truth or a higher law or a better or more enlightening understanding? So at this moment in which the infinite shows itself as finite, the crucifixion, an event that strips the authority from the divine, God gives up God's authority. God does not cling to God's authority, right? McGowan goes on to write, the divine humiliation that Christianity enacts follows directly from Christ's message of love. A loving God, or a God capable of love, cannot be a pure substance, but must be a subject. Only divided subjects can love, because only divided subjects can turn to the other to look for corresponding division. The message of love initially draws Hegel to Christianity, but it is the humiliated God entailed by love that sustains Hegel as a devotee. So this concept is that even God must be split, and we see that with the Spirit, and we see that with Christ, and we see that Father, Christ, Spirit divide. In my own work with my analyst, I'm dealing with young Jay and it's very confusing for me because it's adult Jay and then there's kid Jay, but kid Jay was never really allowed to be very much of a kid in so many ways, and so the two become very confusing. But there's a split there, and even sometimes when suicidal ideation, or however you say it, suicidal thoughts come, the analyst will say, well, what is it you're wanting to kill? It's not that you necessarily want to kill your whole self, but there's a part. Is it within that split and that separate part of you? And it's really tough to grasp because you want to think that you're just a whole story, but often we split. We cut in a moment and go, no, I no longer want to be that person. I want to be this person. And I like this, is that a loving God, or God capable of love, cannot be a pure subject, but must be a subject. So, God must be split, God's self, and at the same time also have to interact with others. So it's not this pure being, which would get a lot of us kicked out of our churches, but I don't have a denomination to kick me out right now, so we're good. I'm going to go on because I think Todd explains this a lot better than I do. So I hope you're going to stick with me here, even though I'm not the world's best reader. The event of Christianity marks the end of history for Hegel, even though it takes 1,500 years for the whole world to register this end. Which that's a very philosophical term, so he's not talking about the end of the world, but end of history, and it's something you have to spend a lot of time studying, so we're not going to get into that. With Christianity, it becomes possible to recognize that even the highest authority imaginable, even the infinite authority of God, suffers from the same contradictions that beset the lowest subject. So when we hear things like, well, God is suffering with you, or God is, and we think, oh, well, that's nice. God's like the, like Daddy Warbuck. Oh, so sorry. I'll adopt you and give you everything. No, it's saying that God literally suffers. God suffers as much as the lowest person, as the person who's struggling with the mental health issues, as the person who's deeply divided in humanity. That God suffers from these same things. Now, I don't see God as a man in the sky, so I don't see it as that clear. I think this is more of an allegory than a factual thing. I don't think God is human form. I think God exists and does not exist at the same time, which is a whole other talk. But anyway. So when you see that even that all suffer, all fall short, in a way, it's not just saying us, it's also saying God. And so this is a different way of looking at things, because a lot of us were raised that God was the victor, that God is in power, that God, is perfect, and we got the gold streets and all these things. But for some reason, the insight that Hegel has is he's saying, wait, no, but this doesn't make sense. And this doesn't add up. And in order for God to be who God says God is, there has to be pain within God. I sent someone something the other day, and it was labeled contradiction, and they got back to me, and I could tell that they were upset, like why I said the word contradiction, not realizing that I was referring to the world as not only just conflicted feelings, but something that allows you to live above truth. It's not just like, I love you and I'm disappointed in you, but it's also the fact that I'm with you in pain and in love. I'm with you in hurt and in hope. And not only am I with you with that, I feel both those feelings. I'm angry, and I'm in love. These emotions that come together and are able to go there. I mean, think about your parents if you have issues. Think about people. Think about relationships. And the possibility to have more than one feeling. I mean, we see that in Dr. King's work all the time. As here he was loving his enemies, but of course there were times where he hated them and despised them and wanted to kill them. But he had to carry that contradiction and find this in between of saying, well, do I kill them? Do I love them? Well, how about I try to heal them and try to fix them? That's me just trying to whittle this philosophy down into more of a swallowable pill, if you will. But Hegel does not end his account of history with the death of Christ or the edict of these Salonica 380 CE, the install of Christianity and religion in Rome. No. He goes, the decisive blow in the development of Christianity occurs with Martin Luther, who offers the subject a direct relation to God. So what he's saying is when the Pope gets removed, when the mediator gets removed, and we are able to have a direct thing with God, that's when Christianity is fulfilled. Tillich said, as long as the church functions, not Tillich, I'm sorry, McGowan, as long as the church functions as a mediator between the subject and God, the subject could not partake in the freedom that Christianity enacts. Now, this is another thing that we've done is we get rid of popes, but we also then add in churches. And then we add in pastors, and we have these things, and we act as those, even if it's not consciously, we think, well, here is the person who believes on my behalf, or here is my mediator with God. And a lot of these times, those pastors act as though we have everything figured out. So you meet with us, and rather than saying like, well, I've just read and studied a lot of books, so I might be able to help you with this and answer a question, In some ways it's like, well, we are these special men of God, touched by the hand of God. And that's just not true. It's just God doesn't have any special people. Everybody's special. And then by everybody being special, that means nobody is special. You get it? There's your contradiction again. We're all special because nobody's special. We're all loved, and that's just it. So suck it up and enjoy it. That's just the way it is. And life is tough, and there are so many contradictions and feeling in that, and so much suffering. But I'll tell you what, in the midst of feeling abandoned, the cross has given me a lot more hope. In the midst of feeling crazy and separated, thinking about Hegel's explanation of thinking that God must have division within God's self gives me hope. And for me, it's not, I don't know. Let's just go with this and see what it says. Someone wrote, my mom says I'm special. Well, I'm sure you are. I'm just kidding. Yeah, of course. My kids are special. That's what's great about being a parent. But God's our parent. So if God's the father, which one of your kids are your favorite? I don't have a favorite kid. I love my kids both because of their uniqueness and difference and special to me. I can honestly say that, which is pretty cool. So, maybe that's why the father analogy works so well with God. So as long as the church has functioned as a mediator between the subject and God, the subject could not partake in the freedom that Christianity enacts. The presence of the church sustains God's obscurity for the subject. Do you understand? And we like to make God obscure. So the church, which we're now gathering, but we're still a collective that meet together. The church or the Pope or the pastors often make God obscure. I noticed that a lot back when in the early 2000s when there was like the big neo-Calvinist crave return, and these guys were just like the mouthpieces of God for some reason, and it was like they totally like made God obscure and angry and mean and a dick and sexist and really created God into this weird thing, and they were gonna this is the way it is, and this is how it has to be. And I've had people this is who God is, and God feels this way, telling me and I'm like, no, you're obscuring God, and you are acting as though you are God, and it's just no, you're actually mentally ill because you think you're hearing voices, So there, take that. Sorry, I'm very practical when it comes to faith and Christianity. Hold on now. So the presence of the church sustains God's obscurity for the subject and leaves God in a position where the divine contradiction does not become evident. So what we need to do is we need something that makes the divine contradiction evident. And if you want something that makes the divine Christian God evident, is trying to understand God on your own and through your own life and through your own studies and through your own, and you will see that is evident, that there is a divine contradiction. There's not only bad contradictions in the Bible, there's not only forgeries in the Bible, but in our own faith itself within God, there is a divine contradiction. And it is so clear that just the fact that we have this thing called the Trinity is a huge divine contradiction, and it's staring us in the face this whole time, and it's often a symbol on the bottom of our Bibles, and no one goes, oh, that's a contradiction. I think we have a lot of comedians on the comments today. Every time I glimpse up, I see something. I don't know if they're having a conversation or not. I just see, I only see like a little bit. History ends only when God of the beyond comes down to earth for all subjects, which is the Protestantism occasion. At that point, everyone can see the divine humiliation that transpires in Christianity. And the divine humiliation is the cross. That was humiliation. That was mocked. That was like, I don't know how, if you were any of the followers of Christianity at that time, the 12, or any of also the women who followed Christ that weren't counted. You know, if you're any of these folks, that humiliation, that divine humiliation, is something that makes no sense. That you're like, I don't think we can come back from this. I mean, people are like, why were Peter and all them back fishing again just days later? It was humiliating. They were humiliated, and they were like, I don't have time to sit in my humiliation. I need to go back to work. You know, this was horrible. You know, we followed this guy around, we believed all these things, and he's dead and he's gone. And I do believe that the reason Judas thought that Jesus was going to break the chains free and run everything over, and Judas killed himself. He committed suicide because I think he was also thought, in a way, by betraying Jesus, that Jesus would take his place as God and rule Israel. Because I think in their mind they were thinking very earthly. And when he realized that Christ was crucified and dead, he just gave up. He just said, well, my life's not only a lie, but I've also had this man killed. And he took his own life. Because I honestly believe that Judas thought he was doing something that would bring Christ to greater rule. But instead, God was humiliated. Now, there is a thing, is that if you want to develop, if you want to if you want to follow Christianity and see Christianity as your religion, and that God is tied to Christ and Christ, then God is humiliated, and then God is defeated, and God is killed, and then you have to go to the Trinity and say, then God is abandoned by God. And so when we feel abandoned by God, God has also felt abandoned by God. Now that seems bizarre to say, but that's kind of where we get into this religious territory. Now I know it seems very very melancholy, but honestly, to me, this brings great hope. Brings great hope. I'll finish just reading a little bit of what here, and sorry I'm going so long on this, but I think it's important, and I think Christmas is an appropriate time for this, to be honest with you, if you're suffering through it. The profound absence of God in Christianity is the source of the freedom that it provides. This is what leads Hegel to make the impolitical remark that is, now this is Tillich's moment to be canceled here. Hegel's moment. I'm getting everybody confused. Hegel's moment where he makes this remark. A human being who has not the truth of Christian religion has no truth at all. Did you hear what I... For this is the one and only truth. So, right here, it sounds like Hegel's not going to be very popular at the interfaith breakfast. But let's go on and see what else what Hegel means by this. Here, Hegel not only fails to be a good multiculturalist, but he also theologizes truth, which would appear to make him a bad subject of modernity as well. 2 strikes against him in a single sentence, but he doesn't strike out. The statement about the truth of Christianity is neither a failure of multiculturalism nor a retreat from modernity. Christianity is the one and only truth insofar as it proclaims that the subject must experience divinity through its humiliation. You understand that? That it's saying that one must experience its divinity through humiliation, which any modern subject, Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim, Jew, Christian, can be recognized that the divine doesn't exist beyond contradiction. Otherwise, one condemns oneself to unfreedom. So there must be contradiction. Protestant Christians imply freedom for all because it exposes the fundamental contradictions of God itself. It represents in advance beyond Catholicism. For Hegel, because it does away with the intercessor of the Pope, a figure that has the effect obscuring the subject of the divine, the true Christian ceases to be impressed by the glory of God. Did you hear that? The true Christian ceases to be impressed by the glory of God. The glory loses its ability to dominate the subject insofar as it comes down from the beyond and exists in the finite form and dies. So the infinite is really willing to become finite, so finite that it dies, and that's what the idea of being finite is that we die. And that's why I've talked about before that I feel like the only thing that's infinite is love, because love continues and goes and passes on. But even the divine says, I've come in here and I will die with you. I will become finite. The recognition of this heart of the divine announces the end of all slavery. Of course, slavery continues well into the era of Christianity. But for Hegel, it requires a betrayal of the foundation on which Christianity is built. History ends with the Protestant Christianity and the freedom that it unleashes. But most often, modern subjects take up a heretical attitude to their Christianity. And I think this heretical attitude is something that we'll all be familiar with, and that's another reason I wanted to share this today. Hegel stands out as a Christian because he absolutely refuses heresy. And we're all going like, I'm a heretic. I love heresy. And Hegel's like, no heresy, man. Unable to confront the humiliation of God, most Christians restore the divine to the position that it has in other religions. So in a way, he's saying like most Christians want victory in Jesus, my Savior forever. They want victory God. They do not want humiliated God. They do not want a God that is humiliated. They don't want a God that experiences. They don't want the infinite to be finite. We give so much victory over the cross that I think we miss the reality of what the cross does and how the cross actually is the thing that makes Christianity a unique faith within itself by just trying to ignore it or use it as a moment of victory rather than a moment of shame and humiliation and the end of God. Every claim that no one knows God's plan, or I have faith in a man upstairs to guide me, or we look to God for assistance in our crisis. Do you hear what these things are being said? Because I know I've prayed out a million times and not heard back. Indicates a thoroughgoing abandonment of the basic tenet of Christianity. God is no longer a mysterious being. And I wrote a book that said that God was, so Hegel's disagreeing with me. Being existing beyond the contradiction of our existence. Now that is true. God is no longer a mysterious being existing beyond the contradictions of our existence. The real heretics are those who cling to the unknown God in order to avoid confronting a divided God. Those who say, I do not want to confront a divided God, a God that is not perfect in the image that I've made God into, a God that is not, yes, a divided image that is the Father, but is also the Son. That is not also the humiliated Son who hung out with prostitutes, who drank too much, who hung out with tax collectors, was known as a traitor, who was killed with all this stuff. To say that there's not a split there, that there's not a contradiction there, to say that, to miss out on that, in a way, God's a mystery. We always say that when people die. My mom died. I prayed for her not to die. And there's something there to me that is greatly unjust, but also there might be the great contradiction of the finite and the infinite working together when that happens. Sorry, it got a little personal there for me for a second. So the real heretics are those who cling to the unknown God in order to avoid confronting a divided God. Hegel recognizes that his version of Christianity is not the garden variety version. During his theorization of its link to freedom, he admits, we need to remember that we are not to be thinking of Christianity of the man in the street as whenever anyone makes it out to be. The problem with the Christianity of the man on the street is that he refuses the full weight of the divine humiliation and clings to the existence of an undivided God. For Hegel, the reliance from the average Christian does not have the power to block Christianity's philosophical revelation. It is the revelation that brings history to an end, despite the regarded efforts of most contemporary Christians. So, we're talking about even things like quantum physics here and things like that. It really gets deep if you wanted to go deeper into it. But my job is to try to simplify what I'm reading here and what my studies of Hegel and stuff, so we could all better understand it and maybe encourage you guys to go deeper in your own life and in your own work and your own time. But I believe that this is work that used to frighten me and because I wasn't an intellectual. And so I just started to try to teach myself how to read this stuff. And then with the help of people like Pete Rollins and slowly getting to Tillich and then moving on to other folks from there, really, Dr. King and folks who are really brilliant, and Freud, who's brilliant but is a simple writer, and then building on that. Those studies. This is what I'm trying to do with my work, is trying to take this, what people have said are the ivory towers, and bring them down to earth a little bit so we can have these conversations, because I think these are not snobby conversations. These are just people who had lots of time and lots of intellect on their high intellect and a lot of time to study these things and look deeply into these things, and found things that would literally change the way we live, change the faith as we know it to be what it should be. And I want to bring it down for all of us to say, how can we make this? This is why Hegel's the same person who gives me the ideas of arguing well, and having tough conversations, having a Christianity that's more understandable, a Christianity that's more relatable. If you see that there's a contradiction in God, that God has suffering, that God has these things, you might start to understand why we suffer more. And it's not such a mystery. Because when the church sells us this snake oil type God, this victorious God, we not only make Christ's death in vain, but we make God's suffering in vain. We make each other's suffering in vain. And then we start to think, well, there must be something wrong with us, or there must be sin in my life, or it must be thing. But instead of realizing that, no, this is how the universe works. This is how time works. This is how humanity works. Just simple things for me to even boil it down to just, one of the reasons I have trust issues with humans is not because humans are necessarily bad. It's that they are human, and that desire changes, and that needs change, and wants change. And so you have a hard time trusting people because they're just haphazardly human beings, that we aren't perfect. We change our minds. And that's okay, but sometimes when you put your trust into someone and saying, well, they're not going to change their mind, that's unfair and inhumane. And what I'm saying is maybe the way we've seen God is not in a way, if we are made in God's image, then maybe God suffers along with us. And maybe God changes God's minds. It's in the Old Testament, it's very obvious that God's mind changes. It's very obvious that if Christ is one with Jesus, if Jesus is one with God, and Jesus is sitting there praying, take this away from me, this cup from me, Jesus knows that his Father is capable of changing whatever God is, its mind or thing or universe or quantum mechanics or mathematical things. I don't petition God with prayer anymore. I just try to live life on life's terms. But today I'll leave you with this. If you don't think God is the God of Christianity, or Christianity is a contradiction, just study the historical meaning of what it meant for Jesus to be crucified. That was by all means seen at the time as a huge failure. I think that the New Testament writers took a little bit more liberty to read it, to explain it in a different way because they knew the ending. But if you were one of the disciples, or you were the apostle, or you were someone living within the midst of that, or a follower of Christ, I think it would have been a horrifically great disappointment. And I'll even go this far as let's just go literal for a second with the Bible, and Jesus comes back as a ghost who can't be touched and things like that. And you're seeing Jesus, and you're going, oh, okay, well, maybe Jesus is just going to be like a ghost king, you know? And then Jesus goes, oh, no, I'm leaving. I'm not staying with you. The idea of that God is going to abandon me again, that Jesus, my friend, is going to abandon me again. Or somebody said, I thought Jesus was a zombie. Whatever Jesus was, I don't really know nor care. But the idea is that Jesus is going. Boom, gone. Again. These guys must have been like, what is this bullshit? I love that one part of the Bible where Jesus is like descending into the air, and they're all going, surely that was the Son of God. Like they're still trying to figure it out. Like, I don't know what the hell just happened, but that must mean that's the Son of God, you know? And then say, oh yeah, I'm going to leave the Spirit with you. So now you've got me, and you've got the Father, and you've got the Spirit, and we're all the same. And so go ahead and live with that contradiction. Usually contradictions are two things that don't match up, but I'm going to give you three things that really screw up, but they're also one, and go ahead and live with that. And so there's your contradiction. There's your Christianity. Not only is it a faith of failure and disappointment, not only is it a faith that embraces shame, it's also a faith that embraces contradiction and is based and built on contradiction. And so, yeah, I see somebody, James just wrote something. Yeah, so when Jesus doesn't overthrow the government, and 11 of those 12 disciples are all killed in horrific ways. And the women, I'm sure, are probably also killed. And then Paul comes along and changes. And then Paul's wrapped in dog skin, thinking Jesus is going to come back, and is killed. And wrapped in dog skin and fed to wild animals. That's just the reality of this faith. You know? So if you're looking for a faith that gives you some sort of earthly victory or earthly religion or happiness or purity, and makes you going to give you all the answers, Christianity is not for you. That's not your faith. Because this is a very complex, contradicting faith that is at oftentimes very, the infinite becomes finite. And often the finite becomes infinite. So this is a faith of contradiction. So I'm going to leave it there today. Happy holidays, guys. I'll see you next week. I've read some of your stuff. I think you guys are having great conversations with each other, so I'm just going to leave it at that, because I think that it's heavy to end on that. Christianity is the faith of the contradiction. Thank you.